nature question this morning, and Bill James joke, as Nancy talked a little bit about, and Brian Green talked about the structure of the minor leagues, and sort of wondered a little bit if that's the best way to develop players. And Bill, for example, suggested that maybe it's not real efficient to have these guys taking buses and airplanes all over the country. They could be, who knows, back in, they could stay in one city and get their rest, all that sort of thing. But I want to start off asking each of these guys if they could change one thing about the minor leagues, about the development system as we know it now. What would you do? Let's start with you guys.
Okay. I would build off of, I wasn't here this morning, but what I heard Bill's point was, which is try and find a way to allow these players to focus on the game of baseball and the work they need to put in and get away a little bit from the travel and the long hours. I mean, when you start to talk to minor league coaches and minor league players and what they go through day to day, and the bus travel across the Midwest League or whatever league they're in, they're spending a lot of time away from the field, and it's tiring. It's a tough process, and I see kids at times toward the end of the year really get tired of that process. So I think if I could change one thing, I'd find a way to bring all of the minor leagues together and give them an opportunity to focus primarily on the game.
And Derek, I have a real quick follow-up. And I had this struck me this morning. I wonder if all that travel isn't maybe necessary training for the major league ones.
It is to some degree, though. I think talking to some major league players who have reached the major leagues and talk about some of the challenges in the minor leagues, the travel is much easier. The plane travel back and forth to cities, it seems like they are. To your point, there is some benefit, I think, to that training and knowing what it's like to show up late in a city and get into a hotel at 3 o'clock in the morning and sleep and then try to get back for a game at 7 o'clock. But the bus travel and some of that time, I think, takes up a good chunk of their development.
Maybe they have 4 or 5 years in that training.
Right, exactly.
I know for me, I mean, with just from the instructional standpoint, just making sure that, every player has all the resources needed just to make sure that they can get the fullest out of their ability. And with that, making sure if you have even additional coaches you can afford as far as on your staff, just to be there and make sure every player is given every opportunity to have a chance to make the major leagues, just to make sure you're giving them all the resources possible. And obviously, in some cases, some teams are being able to add an additional coach here and there to a club, but just make sure you can have even more resources for each player and just an additional teaching aids for those players as well. If you, from a budget standpoint, you can do that.
I'd increase the roster sizes. In general, the full season clubs are 25-man rosters, and the minor leagues is a very different daily schedule compared to the major leagues. The major leagues got an off day usually once a week. Minor leagues is often once every 20 days on a good month. And so it creates a lot of movement within the minor leagues that are not necessary. If your catcher's dinged up, you've got to fly another catcher in there because you need someone to warm up the bullpen. The pitcher's warming up, you need someone to be able to back up that catcher if they get hurt, so you don't stick a shortstop at catcher or a pitcher at catcher. Skilled position players like shortstops or center fielders, when they get hurt, there's rarely other players on the team that can even play those positions. So you're flying a lot of guys around the country from other extended to other levels just to fill in. And so there's basically 2 types of movements in the minor leagues. There's a necessity movement because of injury, and then there's a movement because the player has earned it either positively or negatively. And to limit the number of the first type of movement would be great for baseball. It would also give clubs kind of the flexibility to use their roster how they want to. So if you broke camp with, say, 28 or 29 players, these are young players, 17 to 25-year-olds who are not as strong as major leaguers. A lot of them are in pitch counts. So you can't have your starters go as long. You can't depend on your bullpen to throw every day the same pitcher. There are a lot of them on strict pitch counts. So you really need larger rosters to protect the medical side of these
handle it's so great for me is handle nothing about player development. Yeah, I read baseball and everything, but player development seems to me sort of a black box. There's always things happening inside it that I don't know. I can't tell from the outside what's in there. And a great example, I think, is the whole makeup, character part of it, the equation. And my friend John Sickles sent me a question to ask you guys, which is, and I'll throw it to you, Yeshayah. Do you have a systematic or systematic way of looking at character, personality, both before the draft and then as the players are developing?
Yeah, it starts before you sign the player. It really starts as part of the draft process. You know, we have staff's responsibility to know the player inside out. They've got to get in the homes, they've got to meet the family, they've got to talk to teammates, they've got to know who this player is because it's part of the evaluation process. It's not just on the field or off the field. And that goes into the ranking system when we rank the players for the draft. We line them up on the board and we decide who we pick. That's definitely a big part of it because it also leads to whether that player is going to reach their full potential. It's a large part of it. Your scout is projecting and statistics are projecting, you know, what they might be, you know, 4 or 5, 6 years down the road, but there's a lot of character traits that can hinder them from reaching that potential. And so, you know, we at least feel that's an important part of it. When they are drafted and come into the system, we've got a number of programs in place to try to stop them from slipping through the cracks. And it goes in a variety of different directions. But the answer is yes.
Can you talk a little bit about those specifically, what kind of programs you have, or testing your team might do?
I mean, we've got strength and training programs are a part of it, and a lot of players will show their characters through that, nutrition parts of it. We've got the mental side of the game. We built up that side of our development program. And then also, you know, we encourage our staff to get to know the players, not just as baseball players, but off the field. And we're one of the few teams that have, he's an EPA director, and so if there are issues off the field related to drugs abuse or something going on at home, there's someone for them to talk to. And we've got a few other staff members that do similar things.
Tyrone?
I mean, the biggest challenge you always have is a case where, you know, when the scouts are out seeing these players and you try to get to know those players, you truly don't know fully how these players are going to react once they get into minor league baseball, just because of dealing with, you know, the ups and downs of it, competing, having a situation where you're away from home for the first time, just dealing with that environment, obviously trying to compete, get to the major leagues, but also just dealing with the day-to-day of everything. So, I mean, we try from the standpoint of getting to fully try to know these players and making sure our staff is educated about each guy, and also they're getting to know those guys and make sure that, you know, we have a mental staff that's very good, that they're very involved in our whole situation, our whole operation. So with those guys, just trying to really find that insight on each player and hopefully allow them to reach their full potential and realize where their limits are, and try to get what they can beyond those.
I think to both Yeshayah and Ty's points, it starts with the scouting process. So not to regurgitate some of what they said, but it starts with the scouting process, and the scouts need to know the player. We asked our amateur scouts to go out there to really get an understanding of who the player is. And then there's, from a procedural standpoint, there's a process that we put in place to transfer that information to our coaches after we draft or acquire that player internationally. And that process is sometimes difficult. You only have so much information. When you're an area scout in a region of the country, you need to cover that whole area. You may only have 2 kids drafted out of your area, say, for example, that come into the organization. You had to know each of those players in that area as well as you could, because you didn't know who you were going to select. So we rely on the scout to give us that baseline information, and then when they get into professional baseball, we try and like both these guys said, we have team psychologists, and we have processes in place to learn more about those players, how they learn, how they best work in a clubhouse environment, and we use that information to help inform the coaches about the best ways to go about developing them.
So when when you have information from a scout, what form does that information take on that report? I mean, is this him telling you verbally, I think this is a really good kid? I mean, what does it look like?
I'll take that. I mean, I think it starts with the report. Everyone writes a scouting report, and that information comes into the organization. But at the core of every good organization are great relationships between the scouts and the player development staff. And I think you have a written report, you have information that comes through when you read that, but the area scout may reach out to that low-A ball hitting coach and talk to him about what he knows about the player, what the background is. He'll talk to the farm director. The farm director will talk with the scouting director. So you have those open lines of communication, so you can learn more about the background.
I want to start with you on this national tie because the Pirates have two incredible pitching prospects right now. Pitching prospects might not be the most precious of all commodities, but they're certainly the most fragile of commodities. And this is a good question for all you guys, but do you have data? Every team, I think, now has specific guidelines in place for workloads in the minor leagues and majors too, younger pitchers especially. What are these guidelines? I don't think you know what guidelines are. I know it's proprietary in many cases, but what goes into making up those guidelines? Is there data? Is it tradition? Is it, I'm not going to say it's Tom Verducci, but a lot of people talk about it. When you tell, how do you, to get a broader question, how do you keep those guys healthy? What's the principle behind your philosophy?
I mean, the main idea normally is first getting a starting base and understanding where the player, where he's coming from, the environment, how many innings were they exposed to, especially when they first sign, and then from there understanding. In many cases, there's going to be a guideline in place kind of to start with, and then as they go along throughout the minor leagues, then at that point we're having it ramped up a little bit, but also understanding each individual and how they're set up as well, whether physically, other health-related issues they maybe had in their career, and just making sure that at this point, as that player goes along, that there are things in place for that player just to make sure that he's not kind of exceeding where to a point where it's just way beyond where that player really should be at.
So, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, you have a pitcher who's got a certain history in college, how many innings, needs a certain build. Do you look at other pitchers in the past, how they were developed, and sort of slot in with those guys? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how you place a pitcher in a group and know what kind of workload he can handle his first or second year in the minors.
In many cases, at the very beginnings of going through the system in the lower minor leagues, things are just kind of very much uniform as far as each pitcher in the system basically having set guidelines. And then once you get beyond that, then we can start tailoring some things individually to those players at that stage.
So you have 7 guys come to college and they go to the short season A. They're basically all going to have the same program that first summer.
Except just depending on what's going on. Like if that summer they threw a lot of that first year, they're coming from a collegiate program and they threw a ton of innings. Obviously, we're going to be fully aware of that and consider that factor. But then once we get into the second year, at that stage, maybe that case that player's going to be going into a full season ball. Maybe if they made that jump, then there's going to be something typically that's going to be standard for just about everybody in that staff at that stage, unless there's some medical issue that's involved.
Yeshayah, can you talk about the parent feeding young pitchers?
Yeah, for us, it starts on the scouting side, in the draft or internationally, where, our scouts are looking at the arm action and the delivery to a lot of these pitchers, and there's some red flags that might jump out there. There's also a long medical history on those players, so you may have a sense even before you draft them if they have a medical history or not. Brian Wilson comes to mind off the top of my head. He was a Tommy John guy and he fell in the draft. I think we took him in the mid-20s. We knew that coming in, we knew the history. We had seen his arm action before that, but that was knowledge that we had to play with when we took him. Once you have them and you have their arm action, their delivery, really that first year is going to be the most important year for that player. You have a history of how much they've thrown in the past. You're going to treat them carefully. We have some barometers as well, probably like most organizations. Sometimes it's not necessarily total pitches in the game.
Yeshayah touched on a lot of what most organizations are doing with pitch counts and trying to figure out where guys are. I think globally what we look at is we first consider the history with the player. So if he's had an injury or he's coming off of surgery, his workload changes. And the next step after learning about the history of the player is talking about our organizational philosophy. And that can change level to level. Someone like Ty said, as guys build innings, you draft a kid out of high school, he's not quite at the level of maybe the player that's 21 coming out of college who's thrown 120 innings over the last period of time. So you balance that information and try and determine what the best path is for him over the next few years, assuming perfect health, and then you make individual adjustments. And I think some of that is we leave some of that up to our coaches and feel as to how things go within a game. You have innings limited, pitch limits, give some of those organizational philosophies that you try and follow, but those need to be tweaked at times. Like Yeshayah said, when you have a really difficult inning, or a guy's had trouble commanding secondary pitches, or however that plays out, I think you need to have a little bit of feel as to how you build it for that game.
Derek, you talked about how mechanics goes into drafting decisions for a pitcher, and any specific example you guys see, guys you did draft with mechanics, guys you did draft despite mechanics, would be great.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of industry information out there about deliveries and mechanics and the ASMI. People are aware of ASMI and some of the work that they've done. I think teams, to some degree, apply it differently. And we look at it, and the information that's out there, we know about that information. And I think we spend time considering it. But I think for each guy, it's a little bit of a sliding scale. It depends on the player. It depends on the quality of talent. It depends on what our scout feels about the player. So specifically on players, I can't think of anything that comes to mind. But we talk about it. We have that discussion in the room, and it plays into the consideration about what the pitcher going forward.
I mean, it definitely plays a role, just understanding, these pitchers, trying to understand exactly as far as, if you're thinking a guy has a chance to project him maybe to be a starter, trying to understand, from an arm action delivery standpoint, understanding what you're seeing there, looking for seeing red flags in that case, but also just trying to understand that, you're looking for guys, hopefully, you think have a chance to, at some point, typically guys are going to run into some issues at some point, but guys hopefully you think have the best chance to medically survive and battle through this to get to the major leagues.
We have a unique situation, and other organizations may do it the same way, but Dick Tidrow, who's oversaw our draft for a long time, oversaw player development, and now John Barr, who oversees our draft. Dick Tidrow is still involved. He's the one who's going to be working with these pitchers when they come into organizations. So he's already got a real good feel about how he might fix them or how he may develop them once he become part of the Giants. And so he's able to see that process through even after the draft room. And him and John will talk about pitchers all the time in terms of arm action and what might play and what might not. And they've been wrong, they've been right. You're not always right, but there's a continuity that exists from the draft into development in terms of a plan, what we're going to do with that pitcher, and I think that's made a difference for us. A particular pitcher doesn't come to mind necessarily. I don't know if I'd be comfortable sharing it, but that conversation happens in every draft room in terms of, will this guy get injured? Because when you're talking about investing, $1.5 million into a pitcher, you don't want them to have Tommy John the next year, and it might happen or hurt a shoulder, and it still might happen, but it's a big part of the game, and it's taken into account really with every player you take, whether an injury is going to be a factor in their career.
One more question on pitchers. Yeshayah, say you do get a pitcher who has, quote, bad mechanics, unquote. Do you occasionally try to change the guys, and what goes into that decision?
Well, the answer is yes. The player has to have some aptitude, and it's usually valuable if they're athletic enough to make changes. That's
understand exactly, well, what did the scout see, what did he feel going to allow this guy to have a chance to have success, but also just understanding how athletic is this player, if there's something we can adjustments we can make with that guy to give him a chance to get over that hump. But the biggest thing to understanding what that player is having certain guidelines you have for yourself as an organization. And if you're going to have that in place, making sure both scouting and player development are on the same page to be able to understand what we're saying this player has a chance to be, and then do what you can to make that player get to where his upside is.
I think it's similar to how you train an infielder or a hitter. If there is something that you identify that you think may prohibit him from being successful in the future, you try and address that. And there's a process for that. You work through the coaches. They recommend those changes. They work through the positional coordinator, so if it's an infield coordinator or a pitching coordinator, and what those changes should be. And then ultimately the farm director is responsible for making those changes. So I think to touch on what Yeshayah and Ty said, it's the same thing. You're looking for what are the inefficiencies in what they do, whether it's fielding, pitching, or hitting, that may limit their upside, and how do we address those? And that's ultimately the coach's responsibility.
Yeah, and Rob also, I mean, in many cases, organizations kind of have their own type of what they're looking for. And in any case, that factors in exactly to what their kind of product they're bringing in, and then at that point, understanding what adjustments they can make with this guy or that guy to get them to the level they're looking at.
Let's go big picture again. I want to know how the new CBA has changed, if it has, how you guys do your jobs, and what it's meant for the organization generally. Or go ahead.
I mean, I'll start out. I mean, the great thing about it, the one good thing especially has been players have gone out and signed. They've gotten out. The biggest thing is getting out, the chance to play, get started, get the chance to get to the major leagues earlier by getting going that first year, and then from there being ready to jump that first full year. That for me has just meant a lot for us. In many cases before we were not able to sign guys until relatively late at this previous signing deadline, and that year was essentially lost. Then going to instructional league. But if you have a case where players are now, especially coming out of high school, who now are at that point maybe are ready to go out and play, they can have a full summer under their belt, and then at that point then get into instructional league with more things to address about that player.
I second what Ty says, just getting the players out there earlier. Getting out on July 15th is the deadline now, so you at least, you sign them and then you get them into shape, and you at least get a month or a little over a month of playing time for the guys that sign the deadline. And it really makes a big difference for a player to at least get their feet wet in baseball, to get a sense of what to expect. What we really didn't like was the player signs in age 15, and really their first experience is instructional league, and then their really first experience with the organization is spring training. So, you come from college or high school and you're the big fish in the pond, and you come to an organization, and really your first experience with the organization is coming to spring training. You're on 4 fields with 170 players, and it's just not the environment you want them on. They can feel like they get lost among the group, but they're not special, say, even though they are. When you're on a team atmosphere, you at least get a sense of, what this organization is about, what they're trying to do, how to win as a group, and a family, and a team. And it really makes a difference. And we had an experience 2 years ago, before the CBA changed, our first round pick, Joe Panic, he was actually our first player signed, which is extremely unusual and doesn't happen normally with the first round pick. So it was our first round pick, the first player signed, right after the draft, let's say it was June 12th. He played an entire short season, so he's 350 plate appearances further along in his career than the other first-round picks who signed on August 15th, and he's able to progress his career much sooner. And the goal of the player and the goal of the team is to get to the big leagues as soon as possible when they're ready. So it really starts the process earlier, and it's helping the development outside.
I've heard from coaches the same thing, that getting their hands on the player a little bit earlier and not in instructional league for the first time is the most significant change they've seen from the CBA. I think to touch on the first part of your question about the draft and how the acquisition of players, you've seen just in the past year, you've seen teams change their strategy about how to move that money around. There's been some some talk about how that plays out. I think we'll see how it works over the next few years, but I think it may change a little bit of the dynamic of the players in the minor leagues and who signs and which high school players maybe decide not to sign. There's been a slight change there in the players that come in, but from a development standpoint, I think getting your hands on players earlier and having access to them and developing them just speeds up their time frame, like Yeshayah said.
Let's talk about fielding. Are metrics of any use at all for amateurs or especially for players and minors?
It's challenging. I think certainly there are on the amateur side. Start with that. On the amateur side, when you're acquiring a player, that gets particularly difficult to quantify that. I think, and you do see some information and you learn from it, and you try and merge that with some of the information you're getting from scouts. And I think that's the same process as you start off in the minor leagues. There's some information out there that I'm sure many of you have read on defense and minor league defense. We've read all of that information too, and we do some work internally to determine how valuable it is. But I think we're constantly trying to balance that with some of the information we're getting from our scouts and the abilities that players seem to be developing. And as players change and learn more, and we get that from our coaches, I think it gives us additional information to help us understand what data is out there.
Yeah, I know with many organizations, you just want to get as much information as you can, and just utilizing that information to help as far as what you're seeing from a teaching standpoint. Are guys getting involved? For us and other organizations, it's part of the whole equation of trying to understand these players and try to properly evaluate them any way you can, and just utilize that information.
I agree. It's fairly limited in the amateur and minor league levels. There just isn't enough data. You can do a lot more on your own players because you can create your own system and you can see them play every day. Both statistically, you can create your own systems because you got people at games, and then also your staff that sees them every day and works with them, which is going to be probably far more valuable when you have staff members who've been in the game for a long time and worked with infielders, for 30, 40, 50 plus years. But it's limited, particularly when you're trying to acquire, say, an amateur player or a player from another organization. Your scouts or video may help some, but the data side, it's shaky at best.
Do you guys see that changing? Is more data being collected in minor league games that will be useful?
Nowadays with all the information that's available now, we're definitely utilizing that information, and I believe everybody else is kind of going down that same path, just to make sure that we can look at different tendencies. Even throughout the minor leagues, just seeing where batted balls are taking place and utilizing that information, even to help yourself as an organization as you go about the process of developing, but also, hopefully while you're developing, you're also winning as byproducts.
I think with pitch tracking systems that have started to filter down through the minor leagues, you're seeing that's how the process will work, and eventually I would assume that we'll see more and more information on the minor leagues that we can use.
I think it'll be a while in minor leagues. We're still working on the big leagues. There's a number of systems in the big leagues that have definitely improved it. I don't think there's one, and most people don't probably agree that we don't have a system in the big leagues that's as good as, say, the offensive numbers. But it's starting in the right direction. But for that to get to the minor leagues, it's going to take a fair amount of time. And minor leagues are spread out. There's a lot of stadiums. There's a lot of infrastructure problems which we've looked at to really capture, say, the whole field. It's just going to take some time.
So along the same lines, there's a perception power comes last for hitters, and hoping you guys can talk a little bit about how you project power and to what degree metrics can help that process. Yeshayah, start.
Well, metrics definitely play a role. Scouting plays a role, and development plays a role. It kind of all fits you'll see often on the scouting side, first, that power often will show up in, say, batting practice, but may not show up in games. Sandoval's an example. He signed with us as a 16-year-old. He was in the States as a 17, 18-year-old. And I got to watch his progression, and even at a young age, you can see that power. But he was, a 7 and 8 home run type guy. He'll sometimes show up in kind of the doubles and triples a little bit earlier on. He was always a strong kid, but he increased his strength, and then as he got older, it ended up clicking at a certain point. One unique thing about him is he was always a very good hitter, and I think with some of the good hitters, you'll see it progress a little bit sooner sometimes in terms of how it shows up in games. There's a group of power hitters that comes along, at least I noticed in our system a lot, where they're big strikeout guys and they have a lot of power and they show it a lot in BP. But they've never really learned how to control the strike zone like they need to. And those guys take a lot longer, and often they end up being 4A players and not making it to the big leagues because they're not good hitters first. And I think that represents itself in the numbers, but then also within the players. But becoming a good hitter can also increase that power over time as well.
I have a nice question. Do you guys ask your scouts to watch batting practice for other minor league teams?
Yeah. That's a big.
That's essential. I don't get it. Tom?
I mean, that's a very big part. I mean, when it comes to hitters, we try to do the best job we can as far as understanding what this guy can do as far as a hitter, can control the strike zone, just understanding the traits, what's going to make him a hitter, with the whole idea. Hopefully, you're seeing that guy, maybe those doubles, as he gets stronger, continues to grow, get bigger physically. That would also become have better knowledge of strike zone. Hopefully, at that point, they can put themselves in better counts, and then at that point, hopefully, at that point, we're seeing progression there, more balls that were obviously that were doubles now. Those balls are going out the ballpark. Just that one having a mentality to understand themselves as a hitter, and then also just physically, having their bodies develop as they go from one level to the next to get them to the point where they're now ready to become a major hitter at that stage.
I think you're always starting with the scouting side. You're assessing the tools. So every scout in every organization, they assess raw power. They try and determine what kind of usable raw power does this player have, or what do you think he will develop later as he grows and matures into his body. So it starts there when you're projecting power. But to answer your question specifically about how the metrics and maybe how that plays into development, I think the more data we have on the minor league side, the more we can explore maybe types of ways that power isn't showing up necessarily in the regular stats. So what we look for, we use some internal metrics, proprietary metrics to determine whether or not a guy has plate discipline or has some of the other pieces that are essential to becoming a good hitter, a good overall hitter, and then good overall hitters then eventually reach their power. That's the phrase we'll hear from scouts. Well, then he'll get to his power. And then he'll get to his power as he matures as a hitter. So I think that's the way most scouts look at it. They see power projection coming as the hitting improves, and that's where development comes in. You may see something, you may see big raw power, and to your question about batting practice, you may see big raw power in BP, but there's something in his swing, maybe it's a hitch, or he's locking out his arm, or there's some piece that we see that is limiting his power in games, and that's the development piece. That's what you need to try and address and make changes.
I mean, we've all seen major leaguers who have incredible power in BP, and they could do pages. So, how many of you guys managed to defend yourself? I've been critical for the last couple of years, every so often, about some of the food that I see in minor league clubhouses. And I'm sure this is something you think about a lot, but I think it's fair to say that historically, minor league players have not had great nutrition habits. In that sense, they're both, when they're buying their own food, but also even in the clubhouse. I see, just cold cuts and cheese, and that's about it. And I was wondering what you guys have been doing to address that issue over the last few years.
I'll start out. I mean, each organization has their own philosophy, how they're doing things, but from the standpoint, trying to understand from just a nutritional standpoint, having people in place to put things in place as far as even one, putting the resources there, dollar-wise, to help with your clubs, to make sure that when they do go from one place to the next in the minor leagues, that the adequate meals can be there for them, that nutritional understanding what they need from that element, and then just having a system in place. I mean, I'll just state specifically, with the Pirates, we have, as far as our training facility, Pirate City, it's a case where we have a full cafeterias there, so everything is totally in place for a player to make sure they're eating correctly, but also we just try to continue to educate them as they go along throughout the system when they go from whether stop they're at in the minor leagues. Things are continually monitored with our staff, including our nutritionists, just to make sure to help them understand the choices that they have to make during the course of that, and realizing for them to better fuel their body and make sure they're ready to perform each day.
Let's go back to the history of it. There's a due system in the minor leagues and in the major leagues, and different levels have different amount of dues that players are supposed to pay. So we'll take a full season short A team or a low A team. Normally dues are about $4. Every paid player pays $4, ends up being about $100 in the pot. You have a clubhouse manager who's expected to put on a pregame meal and a postgame meal for $100 for 25 athletes who are hungry, and then the staff members will usually put a little money in. It just doesn't add up, and these players are making between $1,100 and say $1,500 a month, so they don't have much money. So as an organization, I know that you guys do this as well, we supplement that. We're teaching them about nutrition, there's strength programs, you're trying to build, big, strong, healthy men to be top-notch athletes, and so we'll supplement that normal system with a lot more. And because we supplement, we're able to kind of pick and choose what goes into those clubhouses and what they eat there. They can still obviously do what they want when they're out of the clubhouse, but at least we've started the education process about what they put in their bodies. There are still issues, particularly on the road, where you don't often travel with your clubhouse manager. You're kind of dependent on what happens on the road, and that's an issue that really needs to be addressed more. We can help supplement some on the road, but it's not quite as easy as what you can control at your home ballpark.
I think the education point is key for some of the players. You control what they eat to some degree while they're at your facilities. So in spring training, you're providing them meals, and we feel strongly that we've committed resources in that area to help our players get the right nutrition while they're under our supervision. But I think the important point is the education point, because when players go away from your organization, you don't have control of that. And whether it's during the off season or on road trips and guys get out and they eat different types of food, that's when I think there may be some setbacks in their diet. And I think the other part in a clubhouse setting, one thing I'll tack on to what these guys said was that you have kids from different backgrounds. So you have players from Latin America and players from different places in the United States, and sometimes the food tastes are different. So you're trying to manage with limited resources. You're trying to manage some of what players are willing to eat and would like to eat. So sometimes that plays a role.
Well, here's another naive question for you. It seems strange to me that given the investments that you make in these players, that there would be any financial limitations really at all. It seems like with the money you spend on nutrition and good food in the clubhouses, first of all, you can standardize it across minors, and you also spend twice what you spend now, and who would even notice that money being gone?
We feel strongly we've committed those types of resources to our minor league facility. We have nutrition consultants, as these guys do with their teams, and I think that's changed across the industry over the last few years. I mean, I agree with your point going back. I think there are still some challenges that we need to get over, but I think teams are constantly making decisions on where some of that money goes, but I think most organizations, I think for ours, that we've made significant strides and commitments in those areas.
Yeah, and that's a big part as far as teams supplementing with, obviously, the meal money gets set for the players, but also just supplementing to help at the individual clubs that they're at, and then just trying to educate them fully as best you can. Because obviously, once they're outside of a certain element, they're going to be on their own to make decisions. So if you can just try to ingrain those in their heads, hopefully to understand, the choices they're making to get themselves ready for the next day. the better you're going to be and ready to perform.
So one more big question, and then we'll open it up to the floor. I'm going to start with Todd, because again, he started the Baseball Industry Network. I'd like to get you guys take it for a moment on how someone can break into business, especially nice to see so many young people up here. Mike, can you start us off?
I mean, a big thing I try to tell people is, one, really, if you're trying to get in the industry, I mean, make sure you have a passion for this game and have a love for it. Because once you get fully ingrained into it, where you're actually working and you're dealing with everything, and sometimes, in many cases, this job becomes almost like a 24/7 type of job where you're dealing with so many different issues, putting out fires here and there. Just make sure you have a true passion for it first and foremost, and then after that, really understand your skill set and know how you can bring value to a franchise. Because that's the one thing. If you have a case where you understand what you can do, how your skill set can be applied, we're always looking for intelligent people that have great ideas. I'm always looking for people that are smarter than I am, for sure. And if you can have that ability to understand how you can bring your value, what you have as far as values, as far as that value to a franchise, that means so much. And then also just understanding yourself as a person. And the biggest thing is when we hire somebody, it's a case where you're going to be looking, is this somebody I want to be around pretty much, the whole entire year? Am I going to be around that person, that individual all the time? And the understanding, a lot of times you are going to have to go through a situation where you're going to have a little trial and error coming in. In many cases, internships are so important, just giving you that experience and people getting to know you. In a lot of cases as well, when you're looking to get a position with a firm, with a team, I mean, it's a case where, really it's a matter of them getting to know you and understanding exactly what you bring to the table.
I think one thing that comes up, and every once in a while I'll have someone say to me, wow, that's great, you work in baseball, you get to watch baseball all day. That's what you do. And I think most people don't say that, but I think for them, they understand that you can have a passion for baseball. You can really enjoy baseball, but you have to have a passion for working in baseball, to build a little bit off the Ty's point. And that means long hours, that means doing whatever it takes to take care of something in a room, in a draft room. When the draft comes around, if you're not in amateur scouting, you're still involved in the draft. That might mean moving a few magnets on the board, no matter what your title is, and making sure some information gets to our scouting director or running through the trainers to find out what that medical information is. Whoever you are, you need to be open to that. And I think that at the core of it, you have to have that willingness and that desire and that drive. But then, and also to build off of Ty's point, show that you can do something in baseball for an organization. Show work examples. So the candidates that have really stood out to me over the years talking to them are people who have done work in a specific area. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be data related or analytics. It can be video, it can be scouting, it can be going out and seeing 150 players yourself and writing them up and providing it to the team, showing that you have an ability to evaluate. And you can go out and be an area scout or come in a player development position. So I think doing that work on your own and showing the team prior to getting in, I think that's one of the best things you can do.
Now, just a quick follow-up. Somebody writes 150 scouting reports and shows them to you. Are you looking for the quality of that work or just the fact that it's actually done? Somebody cared enough to actually do this on their own?
I think the bar is pretty high. I think both. I think you're looking for someone to actually do it and get out there and put the time in and show that they have what it takes to get out there and grind that out, for lack of a better term. But you're also looking for someone who you think can impact the organization when they walk through the door in some way or another. And the quality of the work has to be at a certain caliber that matches what we want within our office structure or within our scouting.
I mean, I agree with both what Derek and Ty say. I mean, a couple of things I would add on, and really I agree right 100%. When you come in, it's good to have a personality that you can work in a team. I think that's really important. It's something I know we look for, I'm sure you guys look for in an interview. You get a group of people that they think it's going to be a year or two and they're going to be making decisions and be the general manager. And it's not that step of a process. You're going to work hard and you may be doing
questions? All the way back.
This question is for Mr. Brooks. In the last couple of years, the Pirates have drafted players such as Josh Bell and Mark Appel, players who other teams passed over because they were considered high risk. They didn't know if they were going to be able to sign them. What's the reason that the Pirates went after this type of player instead of going on a safer route?
I mean, a big part, obviously the CBA has changed some things as far as things, but we've always taken the challenge of, this is a player that we like and the ability is there. We're willing to do what we can to try to get that player signed and make them believe in wanting to become a Pirate. Obviously, the player also has to want to go want to get into pro ball. I mean, they really have to have that initiative to do that. But just from an organizational standpoint, it's a case where we've just found players that we like, identified, and from that we were willing to take some chances. And obviously, in that case, one player, Josh Bell, did sign, and then Mark Appel obviously decided to go a different route. But as an organization, we're not afraid to take chances. But obviously, we do try to understand the risks involved in each pick. And obviously now, with the way the CBA is in place, it's very important if you can to sign every player, especially in those first 10 rounds, that you're trying to make sure that you can get value for what you're doing here.
Yeah, right there, Mike.
Each of you probably knows the prospects in your organization maybe better than anybody else. Last couple of years, both the Giants and the Indians have traded their top pitching prospect. I'm sure the Pirates have had some offers. You have a meaningful role in judging whether prospects should be traded or established for pen race, etc.
I'm part of that process. It's the general manager's decision, but he weighs in from all areas of the organization. Typically, if it's a large organizational decision, he does a great job with that. He's open to basically all the opinions there, and he wants to hear it. And we provide him studies on it. We provide him profiles of the players. We have a number of our scouts see even our own guys, so we know him as well as we can before they're traded. But at the end of the day, your goal is to win as a major league organization at the major league level. So there's windows that organizations have where you have an opportunity to win. And I think that's where a decision is made, and that's why he's the one making the decision. And that's weighed 100% of the decision. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think as a fan base, you owe it to your fan base when you have that opportunity to take advantage of it and go for it within reason, and that's taken into account.
I've always wondered if there's an emotional cost for you guys when one of your top guys gets traded. You want to talk about that?
Yes, there is. You get to know these guys very well, and your staff does, top to bottom, and it's not uncommon that you're trading a guy that you know is going to be a good major leaguer. It just ended up being the right decision for that organization at that time. I mean, we've traded some people that I think the world of, and I think they're going to be great, and I think they're going to be good for another organization, but it's kind of part of the developmental process that I think we did the right job on our end to draft the right guy and develop the guy that's going to be a big leader. Our player development staff did a good job of developing that person to make them a valuable commodity, and sometimes they end up helping your team win a championship, and sometimes they may help another team. I mean, it's the way it works.
Yeah, I think we have over the last few years had some trades both directions, trading away some prospects and then trading away some established major leaguers. And I think anytime you make that decision, it's not easy to get to that decision, but you weigh all of the information you have available to you, and Chris Antonetti will ask, just as most GMs will do with their group, will ask for input from everybody to try and get all of the information and then make the best decision they can for the organization going forward. But to Yeshayah's point, I think you have to look at it as an organizational decision and not just a player development decision. There may be a connection to that player that you drafted or that you helped develop, but if you believe as an organization you're taking a step forward and making your team a better team, you have to look at it from that standpoint.
You know, one more thing as well. I mean, one thing as an organization, especially depending on what cycle you're into at that stage. I mean, you're at a point where you can be collecting, building prospects, but eventually there's going to be probably a time when you're going to have to truly then make some tough decisions, decide who can we really keep as our core, and what are the guys that we feel that we can internally replace if that was some other guys coming behind me. So it's always a tough thing just trying to understand that, realizing as you get to a certain point in the cycle, you're going to have to, at that point, start to really decide and make some tough decisions on the players. But you do get a heartfelt relationship with those players as you go along.
Yep.
I want to ask you, trying to link the discussion we had some yesterday today about the discussion with the minor league. Can we improve the minor league system and make it more viable for development? And you look at Tyrone and dynamic with young prospects, and I may be transcending into the scouting, but it affects you gentlemen in the organization. And so my question is this: when you're dealing with signed players, trying to look at it from the prospect to the standpoint of the player or the family, how do you try to differentiate yourself, or can you differentiate yourself in terms of approaching a prospect, in terms of trying to land that player, looking at it from the prospect's decision, the family's decision, ergo, gee, should he be, for those that might want to go to a college program, for example, versus coming into the minor leagues. Can you explain some of the atmospherics and the dynamic and how that impacts your planning and thought process through that? Because I'm sure that's pretty important.
We try and there's two phases to that: prior to drafting the player and then after drafting the player. I think prior to drafting the player, for the most part, you're removed from that process of educating them a lot about the minor leagues and how that works. A lot of players now have agents and advisors who help them understand that process, and it's their job in a lot of ways to educate them on that. Once you draft the player, for them to get comfortable and their family to get comfortable with your organization and how your organization develops players, you try and be as transparent as possible and tell them, here's how the process will work for your son, and here's the way we intend to provide him resources, every resource available to us that we provide to this player, and ultimately it's up to the player and to the player's family to decide whether or not they are ready to start their career. As Ty said earlier, all we can do at that point is just give them as much information as possible about what we are trying to do to help them develop as a baseball player.
I think part of the process, I agree with everything Derek said. There's a systemic part of the contract. There's a college scholarship plan that's usually part of most amateur contracts, and that's a negotiation. So if you've got a high school or even a junior in college, they can negotiate a certain amount of money that could go to their college scholarship. So there's a number of high school players that may not want to go to college or might not be ready to go to college at that point, and they want to go to pro ball. So within the contract, you can structure it, well, if they get released when they're 24, they have now money to go to college, and that can kind of help supplement if they're being offered, say, a scholarship from a program, and they don't want to go to that program. So that's helpful for baseball and something within the contracts.
Yeah, I mean, you're always just trying to educate the player and the family during the course of everything, just to make sure, as you in that process prior to the draft, you're doing as much to educate them on that. But then once you get the player in, obviously in your system, at that point you're trying to make sure you have the best plan that's in place for that player, and also make sure him and his family understand what he's about to undertake as far as coming into the organization, and realizing the commitment that we've made to him, and also him understanding, hey, this is a great opportunity for himself to better himself, and obviously having a college scholarship plan like Yeshayah was talking about is so important to have. At least there's something there in place for that player in case something does happen to go wrong at some point later.
We have time for one more question. Then neglecting the side. Anybody? Right here.
question is this. You've talked about players developing over time and working with players on getting better, and then, you know, some people might come in with a bunch of power already. Somebody who has to, my question is, I'll simplify. The players that learn to get better in the minor leagues and improve themselves, we've talked a lot about players that feel like just grinding out. This got me here, I'll keep doing that. Do you feel like the habits built by those players that really develop themselves serve them well at the next level? Do you see them continue to try and develop at the next level, or do you see that kind of stop? Hey, I got here. Now I'm a major leaguer, I don't have to work on myself anymore. Do you see those skills continue forward?
You know, a big part, obviously, when a player first comes into a system, first you're just trying to get them acclimated to the whole system itself and understanding the process of what you're dealing with from a day-to-day basis. But also, as that player is starting to advance, and it was hopefully part of your scouting process itself, was understanding kind of the aptitude of that player, the ability to make adjustments. And that's a big part of everything as far as the game. But understanding, can this player adapt to different things and different conditions during the course of a season, and then from there continue to grow along to advance from level to level, realizing what things they need to improve upon, understanding that aspect, just to get better, and also having, you know, plans in place and teaching aids available so players can clearly understand different things, and also realizing that every player is different and how they go about understanding, go about learning, and just realizing those differences in each player, and realizing how you can push this player one way and another guy a different direction to make sure to understand, hey, this is what we're trying to do, and just having different teaching points to help that player advance and make those steps.
I mean, I would say, you know, it's important for players to know who they are, but be willing to make the adjustments. Adjustments is a huge part of the development, to be open to them, to be willing to be, it's called being coachable, but, you know, they're surrounded by, you know, people that have taught this game for years and years and years, and know certain characteristics about players that really won't play at the next level. That the player may have had success in high school, or they may have had success even at the lower levels, but their game won't play at the next level once the league's adjusted to them. And the players that realize that sooner are a lot more effective. We had Jeff Kent come talk to our minor leaguers a couple days ago, and he was talking about that exact thing, you know, that you really need to be open to adjustments and listen to what your coaching staff says. And he talked about how he made adjustments all the way through his career. He was still making adjustments at the age of 40 in baseball. And you'll hear a lot of players do that. Lopez was on the panel on Thursday night that I saw, and he talked about that, how he continually made adjustments through his career, and it's made him a better player. So to be open to it, and not just from the staff, but be able to watch other players and pay attention to your teammates in the game. And as you learn the game, and you learn what the opponents are doing to you, you can make those adjustments. And I think because this is SABR conference, to put statistics into it, statistics can play a role in that too. They're often used as kind of evidence for the player to make them understand what some of their weaknesses are. And it's not counter to what a coach will show. A coach will use that as evidence for the player that, you know, you're striking out 26% of the time and you're an A-ball, and that number statistically is probably going to go higher when you go up, and there aren't many players you can point to in the big leagues that are doing that and don't have power and yada, yada, yada. But that can be part of the evidence that's provided for a player to show them that adjustment needs to be made. We need to shorten your swing now. You know, you need to work on making contact or controlling the strike zone or whatever it is that you're working on. The mechanical part of the swing can coincide with convincing the player that an adjustment is made. And some players don't need that convincing, and some players absolutely do.
I think it's what separates players at any level of success, and I think it's like a lot of other industries. If you have this insatiable desire to be better and to continue to get better, I see it when we walk around spring training right now with major league players, guys taking extra batting practice, guys who've been around a long time, that they know that at some point their skills may deteriorate a little bit, and they're going to need to figure out a way to get better, even while that's happening as they get older. And I think those traits show up in the minor leagues. I mean, we have some minor leaguers, I won't say his name, but there's one story that a minor leaguer who had a list in his locker of every player who was taken right ahead of him. and who those players were and where they were. And it was, maybe it wasn't so much about the players, but it was about him wanting to be better than everyone else. And every team that passed him, he wanted to be better than that player. And I think that separates some of those players. And you see, it does show up pretty early on, but as guys get through the minor leagues, it doesn't stop at the major league level. I think those are the best players.
Well, we can do this all day, but we're out of time. I want to thank these guys.